everyone, and welcome to my channel, Babbling Books. We are going to talk about all the books that I read in September. I read 19 books, which is about twice as many as I usually read. But we had some problems with some of the plumbing at our house, and they've had to jackhammer up a floor, and it's just been a small nightmare. So whenever things are like that, I either read a ton or I don't read at all. Sorry, my cat is thinking about trying to knock this over. No, okay. So half of the books I read, roughly half, are physical copies, and the other half are on my Kindle. So I'm going to talk about the physical books first, and then I'll switch to the ones on my Kindle. So, I put them too far out of reach. To start with, we have The Reader on the 627 by Jean-Paul Didierlaurent. It's so hard to say that without trying to do a French accent. It's shiny. So this is a quirky little book. And it's almost presented as like a cozy read. That's what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be about this guy reading on a train and then maybe like touching people's lives with what he's reading, or people are going to be interested in reading. I don't know. But that's not what it is. So you have this guy who gets on the train every day to go to work, and he has random pages from random books, and he'll read the page and that's it. And then he goes to another page. So like the first page could be like a gardening manual. The second page could be like how to fix your car. The third page could be a random page from a random, fictional fantasy. And he comes across the journals of this woman he's never met, but he becomes intrigued by her. And that's really all I can say without spoiling the book. There's a lot of little subplots, but it's mostly a character study. And there's side characters that are almost more interesting than the main character. I really do not feel like I'm doing this book justice because I did enjoy it. If you like quirky characters, odd people, and quirky things happening, this is a really good book for you. I did enjoy it. It's well written. I liked getting to know these sort of odd people. I like the originality of the story. So I did enjoy it, and I do recommend it. But just beware, there is about 7 pages in this book where you have to read about the bodily functions and bathroom habits of strangers. It was gross. And I really wish the author would have just left it out of the book. But that's just a warning for people who may have a sensitivity to that, because it was not my favorite. So that's The Reader on the 627. And we have The Stars, My Destination by Alfred Bester. So this is actually a classic sci-fi. It was published in the 1950s, and it was my favorite book of all of September. In this world, humans have discovered how to teleport. It's called jaunting in the book. Scientists don't know how people jaunt. They don't know why people jaunt. They just know they can. And the science behind jaunting is sort of handled with like this tongue-in-cheek manner that I really enjoyed. So sort of like if you've read any of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books, someone says, "Hey, how do you fly?" And he responds, "Well, you hurl yourself at the ground and you miss." And it's hilarious. So that is sort of the manner in which jaunting is explained. So this is not a super high-tech book where you feel like you need to have a degree in engineering to understand it. The main character is Gully Foyle. He is a complete and absolute bastard. He has no redeeming qualities except he's mildly clever, but that's about it. So Gully Foyle is stranded on a ship in space. It's dead in the water. He is the only survivor. The ship has lost all integrity. He's barely surviving. He sees a ship in the distance. He hails it. The ship comes to him. And without any explanation, they just leave, abandoning Gullyfoyle to his fate. So from that moment forward, Gullyfoyle decides that he is going to get revenge on these people who left him, and he doesn't care what it takes or how long it takes. That is the story. I was not really feeling this when I first started reading it. I got into bed. I want to say that I either finished chapter 3 or I was starting chapter 3. And I stayed up the rest of the evening until I finished this book. Because it went in, the plot took a turn that I was not expecting. I absolutely love when that happens. The character of Gullyfoyle, there was some adaptations that I was not expecting. I was very, very impressed with this. I was impressed with the plot. And I liked rooting for a character that I thought was terrible. So Gullyfoyle is this violent, ignorant beast of a man who's also a rapist. But I found myself wanting him to succeed and to get revenge, even though he is just a terrible, terrible person. The female characters in this book are, I mean, the author portrayed women terribly. So you're either, so basically all the women in this book are I'll forgive anything you do to me or anything that happens to me because I love you. Terrible. Now, there's a few moments where I want to say maybe 2 of the female characters have a badass moment, but it doesn't make up for any of the rest of it. So, I recommend this if you're trying to read, trying to get into classic sci-fi. This is a good place to start. It's very accessible. It's probably a pretty good place to let me think. If you're new to sci-fi, this reads like a novel. It's not as heavy with science as a lot of other sci-fi. So this would probably be accessible to you as well. So that is The Stars My Destination by Alfred Bester. Highly recommend it. It was my favorite book of September. And then we have White Fragility. Why is it so hard for white people, almost hit myself, to talk about race by Robin DiAngelo? Yeah, wasn't a fan of this. She makes a few good points. She is obviously a relatively intelligent woman. And I had some interesting discussions with my friends and my husband about some of the things I read in this book. My issue with it is people of color are portrayed as being very emotionally and psychologically fragile. And the whole thing reeks of white savior complex. So this is a white person writing to other white people. So white people can protect people of color from white people. Which, I mean, there is probably many, many, many slivers of truth in that. But I just don't think this book portrays people of color in the correct manner. It just reeks of white savior. And I didn't like that. I just found it sort of distasteful. I think if you want to learn about racism and what you can do to combat racism and improve yourself, then I think you should read books written by people of color. So that's what I'm going to do from now on instead of picking up books like this. Ooh, so that got a 2.5-star rating for me. And then we have The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So this is a tiny, tiny little book. It's only 15 pages long. And this is just like a classic short story. So Charlotte Perkins Gilman herself suffered from a nervous complaint, which this particular nervous complaint is like postpartum depression. And it inspired her to write this story. Now, I couldn't find, when I was reading about it, I couldn't find anything to support the idea that this was the story was very specific to what happened to her. I think it was just the inspiration. So this was published in the 1890s, and this woman has had a child, and she's had like a nervous breakdown, which is probably postpartum depression. And her husband, who's also her physician, takes her, the baby, the nursemaid, and moves them into this house that they're renting. The wife is on the top floor. It's like an attic that's been converted into a nursery. And he basically controls every aspect of her life. He doesn't want her to write because it could upset her. He doesn't want anything to cause her any kind of emotion at all because it could upset her nervous complaint. And she becomes obsessed with the wallpaper in this room. We read about her slow descent into madness, and I was left just feeling really, really angry that women were treated this way, that the author could have even experienced a small part of this, and the way that her husband, the character's husband, treated her like this child who couldn't make any decisions for herself. And then as I'm reading it, I'm thinking to myself, no wonder she's gone mad. I mean, this would drive anybody mad. But it was just terrible. But it was a powerful, powerful story. I do recommend that you read it. It's worth a read. But it's just not a happy little story. But it was very, very good. And then I read The Redemption of Galen Pike, a short story collection by Carries Davies. So I want to say that I've read, I thought that I had read another short story collection of hers. I'd have to look. But I loved this. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I want to read more from this author. And there's one story in particular. It takes place in the Old West here in America. And there's like a frontier wife, and her neighbors, all the neighbors are super, super far away. And it's just her and her husband. And it's like one of those places where you have to travel hours to reach a neighbor, like hours on a horse or a wagon. And there's this one man who keeps coming around, and the wife doesn't like him. She just gets a bad feeling. And one day he shows up and she's by herself. And there's this feeling when you're reading the story, you feel this pressure and this like just creepiness, and that pressure intensifies as you read the story. And then you get to the end, and at which point I was just like, yes, this is amazing. So I do very much recommend this. I would think anything by this author I would get without even reading the book, the back of the book. Solid writer, great imagination. Can't recommend this enough. And that is The Redemption of Galen Pike by Carries Davies. So then we have To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. So this is a huge, huge chunker of a book. It's almost 1,100 pages. So with all that drama that has been going on with our house, I wanted to just sink into a space opera. So when I came across this, I want to say I was at the grocery store. I immediately picked it up, and it sounded like exactly what I needed. The problem is this book has nothing new. It is so average, which I think that sounds terrible to say, but it's a space opera. It's a first contact story. And that's literally the gist of the entire book. So you have a character. Humans have been spacefaring for, I want to say, over 100 years. And they've explored space. They found a relic that proves that there is an alien life form out there that is capable of intelligence. They're much more advanced than humans, but humans have never come into contact with them. So this woman is on this planet. She has a first contact moment, and that's when the story starts. You get to know her pretty well. She's the main character. but she only felt 75% of the way completed. She didn't feel very fleshed out. The secondary characters who are in the entire book are hardly fleshed out at all. And I am a character driven reader. I have to want more with the characters, more time with the characters. So if the characters aren't written well, I don't get along with the book. And I think that was the major issue with this, on top of the fact the book was about 300 pages too long. It should have been simplified. Something should have been cut. It was just, you know, an average read. I think I gave it a 3-star rating. And then I read American Housewife by Helen Ellis. So this is another short story collection. I really, really enjoyed this one too. There's one story in here about, there is, these two women are sharing like a floor. So there's apartments, 2 apartments on the floor, and there's a communal hallway. And there's an older tenant who's been there for a long time. The apartment across the hallway, the lady died. A new tenant has moved in with her husband. Well, she wants to change the decor of the communal hallway, and the older tenant isn't having it. So they start communicating back and forth, and it starts out, you know, pleasant, and then it disintegrates into aggression and just these confrontations and just pretty much all of the wonderful, yummy drama that, you know, you see those memes where you're like, when your neighbors are fighting, you know, this is you, and the person's like outside, like, you know, vacuuming their grass. That's what this reminded me of, because I cannot believe the way that these 2 grown women behaved and the things they did to each other. I absolutely loved that story. I don't think I'm ever going to forget it. It was highly entertaining. It was highly amusing. And I will definitely read more books by this author. And then we have the graphic novel Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. I read the novel earlier this year. I absolutely loved it. It's probably going to be one of my top reads of 2022. So I decided to get the graphic novel edition. The problem with this is my favorite verses aren't in the graphic novel edition. So while I loved the novel, I enjoyed the graphic novel. The art in it is mostly watercolors with maybe a bit of charcoal, but I loved the artwork. See I say it's she. Yes, Danica. There's all these dark backgrounds, and then it creates the image with this contrast of a lighter color, which I thought was just beautiful, with all of these dark blues and purples. It was just gorgeous. So this is a story of a teenager who gets a gun, gets into an elevator, and he is going to get revenge for his older brother's murder. That's not a spoiler. That's literally the plot. And the entire story is told in the elevator between those 7 stories. What an excellent writer. I mean, how amazing to think that an entire book can be contained in such a small space as an elevator in such a short time as a 7-floor elevator ride. Absolutely fantastic. The book blew my mind. I do recommend the graphic novel because the artwork is beautiful. The story is beautiful, but my favorite verses were missing, but it was still, I'm really glad that I read it. Okay, so these are the last 3 physical books that I have to talk about, and I'm going to talk about them all at once. So this is book 1, book 2, so hard to see with the shine, book 2, book 3 of the series, book 4 is on my Kindle. Okay, so these are the Off-Campus series by Elle Kennedy. All right, so these are new age college romances. The love interests, the guys are hockey players, And the female love interests are all like fine arts majors. There's one that's like a theater major, one who is like majoring in music. But what makes these books so fantastic is how realistic they are. The characterizations are not over the top crazy. The plots are completely believable. The misunderstandings are completely believable. And they're handled in a rational and believable manner. So they're not over the top drama. She mostly stays away from tropes, you know, like where the girl is sort of nerdy or geeky or whatever, and nobody ever pays attention to her. But the moment she hooks up with the hot guy, all of a sudden other guys, you know, are just falling head over heels for her. None of that. So if you like contemporary romances, these are a really, 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 really great series. And book 4 is slightly different. The main character is not like a artsy girl. She is pardon the term, but she's like she's like a super determined, borderline uptight workaholic character. And book 4 is my least favorite of the series. But that was more of it's a me, not them. But this is my favorite college series, and it's my favorite contemporary romance series. I do highly recommend them. If you want more details about these books, go check out the video I posted in February talking about my favorite romances. That's the Off-Campus series by Elle Kennedy. So this is books 1, 2, and 3. Book 4 I read on my Kindle. So next, I had my Goodreads open and I closed it. Next, we're going to talk about the books I read on my Kindle. Pull up my Goodreads. Make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. The first book, Night in Eden by Candice Proctor. I really enjoyed this one. It is a historical romance. The main setting is in Wales. The author wrote about Wales in this beautiful, poetic manner. I loved it. I'm not usually big on scenery in books. It's one of my biggest issues with Stephen King. But I wanted to visit Wales while I was reading this. It sounded green and lush and wild and just a fantastic setting for a story. So the main character committed a crime, and she has been transported to Wales as like a bondswoman for punishment. But it's and she is she is purchased by this man who lost his wife and needs a wet nurse for his son. And she had just lost her baby. And he's not a hateful man or a cruel man or anything, but he's cold. And she is broken. She had to leave a child behind in England. Her infant just died. And now she's been transported. So it's a very dramatic, angsty sort of a story. But I thought that their romance was beautiful, and I enjoyed watching it unfold because it's unfolded in a natural manner. There was not an insta-love. She had to heal, he had to heal, and all of those things were addressed by the author. So that was Night in Eden by Candice Proctor. I did enjoy that. And then after that, I read Only Mine by Elizabeth Lowell. So I was in the mood to read some emotionally fraught books, and I literally looked up historical romances, cruel hero maybe, and I found this book on the list. So I think I said Only Mine by Elizabeth Lowell. So you have a character named Wolf. His father is an Englishman, and his father is an Englishman, and his mother is a Native American. And the book takes place in like the mid 1800s. And when his mother dies, he goes to England And so he's raised by both. So he's raised by Native Americans and he's raised by his English father. So he's both sort of a wild man of the West, and he can also be a gentleman who conducts himself in English society. And he has befriended the daughter of another Englishman, and they bond and become incredibly close. Well, on a return visit to England, they haven't seen each other in a while, she concocts this plan to force him into marrying her. And he's a good guy, and he can't figure out how to get out of this situation without harming her, so he agrees to it. But he's not happy. So he intends to take her to America and make her like a frontier wife. Basically work her like a dog until she begs him for an annulment. Well, there's nothing that is going to convince her to get an annulment because she has past trauma that has forced her into this situation, and he has no idea about any of that. He thinks she's just a spoiled, rotten little princess who just wanted what she wanted. So he works her like a dog, and the whole time he feels terrible, but he wants out of this marriage. He doesn't want to be in it, and he resents her for putting him in this position. So, of course, they have to figure out where to go from there. I really did enjoy that because that's what I was in the mood for. I wanted a lot of angst. And then I read Ride the Fire by Pamela Clare. This is a pre-colonial romance. Not a fan of the time period. So I think I ended up giving this a 2.5-star rating, but it was more of a me issue than the book. So you have a woman on the frontier. Her husband's dead. She's heavily pregnant. And this man shows up and he's wounded. And he pulls a gun on her and says, "You're going to let me in your house and you're going to help me." She's terrified of him. And they have to learn to sort of work together because when you're alone, you know, God knows how many miles away from help, you have to do what you have to do. So that was an okay one. And then I read The Goal. So this series right here, there is a spinoff called Briar U. So this book is book 1 of Briar U. One of the characters from... the main character of this book is the little sister of one of the hockey players from the other series. So, the sister, she is, her family's rich, and she's blonde and beautiful, and she loves fashion. She's majoring in fashion, and people think that she's this ditzy blonde. And the love interest is a hockey player named Jasper. So you meet him in the other series. I could not wait to read his book. He's this, he's covered in tattoos, and he has this really, muscular physique from being an athlete. But on the inside, he's still the geeky kid that the jocks would shove into lockers. He likes fantasy and role-playing games, tabletop games, video gaming, all those great geeky goodness. And so he thinks that the girl, that he thinks that she's just this spoiled, rotten little princess. And he keeps hurting her feelings. And they have all these little interactions where he's just an ass to her because he thinks that she deserves it, but then he feels bad. I don't know. I didn't really like this book. She was like an Elle character, like from Legally Blonde, where she might have come off as ditzy, but she's really not. She's an intelligent person. But I expected better from the male character. I could not believe that in this day and age that I couldn't find the idea of this guy learning about this girl and being like, oh, I do like her. She's not a piece of crap. I mean, why did you think that in the first place? There wasn't a good reason other than the fact that she had money and she was beautiful and she liked fashion. But so I couldn't buy the romance. I never felt it. I was really disappointed, and I expect better from Elle Kennedy. But anyway, so after that, so I came across another series by this author called Midnight Revenge. It's actually book 7 in the Killer Instincts series. I haven't read books 1 through 6. I only read book 7 because that was the only one I was interested in. So you have a group of mercenaries, and you have a doctor in South America. The mercenaries fund this doctor. So she has like a hospital and a clinic, and the mercenaries don't care what she does with the money they give her, as long as when they call her and say one of our guys is wounded, that they are her first priority. So she has a one-night stand with one of these mercenaries, and she gets pregnant, and she wants to find him and tell him, and she can't get a hold of him. So she hunts him down and is trying to tell him that she's pregnant, and she gets embroiled in this job that this mercenary has gone on. So she's caught up in all this action. My problem with this is the love interest, whose name I cannot remember. Let me look it up real fast. His name is Derek. So Derek is now forced to spend time with his one-night stand who's having his baby, and he wants nothing to do with her. He has every intention of making sure she has everything she needs and that she's safe, but he does not want to be a part of her life or the child's life. And my problem is Derek is this tortured, traumatized man who has the emotional maturity of a 7-year-old because of his past experiences. But then you have a woman who is a doctor, and she's very intelligent, and I didn't buy the romance. I could not buy that the female character would have let him treat her this way. I don't know. I just didn't buy it. I had issues with, the author was not able to convince me that these two people would have ever fallen in love, which is a big issue when you're reading a romance novel. So I ended up giving this one a 3-star rating because it was written well. The action was fun. I actually think it's a 2.5 star. I rounded up to 3. Yeah, I rated it 2.5 stars, rounded up to 3. Wasn't a fan. And last is Polaris Rising by Jessie Mahalik. So this is book 1 of the Consortium Rebellion. So I told my husband I wanted to read a good shoot-'em-up science fiction. I didn't want to read anything with a lot of tech. I didn't want to read anything with a lot of politics. I just wanted a good old-fashioned Firefly-esque space opera. And this is what I picked up. Now, I will be the first to admit this cover is beautiful. I love these colors. I probably would have read this anyway because I would have been so drawn to the cover. So you have humans are very well traveled. They're a spacefaring species at this point. I don't remember there being any aliens at all. It all was just humans. And there are 4 houses, like the mafia, 4 houses that basically rule the entire world of humanity. And the main character is a daughter of one of these houses. She ran away from home to avoid being used as a political pawn in an arranged marriage. So there's this warrant out for her capture. And the bounty hunters capture her. They throw her in the brig. And who should be in the brig but her love interest? And this is where the problems started. If you have ever seen Pitch Black, then you know who Riddick is. So the guy in the cell is a wanted murderer, an escaped convict who is a super, super badass, whose eyes glow so he can see in the dark. Riddick. So I decided to overlook that because I was intrigued. And then there were more problems. So you have a woman who's basically been raised like a pampered princess her entire life, but she's able to shoot guns, hack into computers, hack into the access control for doorways, just all of these things. And you're supposed to believe that she can do all of these things because being a member of one of the houses is so cutthroat. You have to have all these skills. The problem is she was just too good across the board for everything. You know, she talked about how she wasn't a very good fighter. Well, then she spars with Riddick, and apparently she's way better than what she says she is. I mean, there's just all kinds of problems. And then I'm supposed to believe that these two people fell in love. It happened way too fast. Other than the fact that they were the only two males and female, the only male and female together for a while, I couldn't figure out why it is that they were falling in love. I won't be reading the next book. It's not terrible. It just didn't fit what I really enjoy about sci-fi, even a good old-fashioned shoot-'em-up, Firefly-esque sci-fi. But if you're a big fan of like maybe a sci-fi romance, maybe this would be a good option for you. It's not steamy. There's no details when they're intimate. It had a lot of action, and the Riddick-like character is hot. That's for sure. But yeah, this just wasn't for me. I think I ended up giving it a 3-star rating because there wasn't really anything terribly wrong with it. It just wasn't great. So that is all of the books I read in September. Let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought of them. Let me know what your favorite book was in September, because I think I could use some more material. Because for the most part, I feel like everything I read in September was mostly average, except for the 2 short story collections and the Star Is My Destination. Those were the only 3 books that I thought were really good. So yeah, like I said, let me know. Maybe you can suggest something to me that I don't have or I haven't heard of. That would be fantastic. So yeah, I guess I will see you guys here next month for my next wrap-up video. Bye.